Paul O. Jenkins, who wrote the book called Richard Dyer-Bennet, The Last Minstrel. So this is a very good book that you wrote, and it's unique in its field because it's the only one.
Yes, it's the only book written about him. Well, when I was growing up, I listened to Richard Dyer-Bennet quite a bit. His father, John Dyer-Bennet, was a professor of mathematics at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and that happened to be where my father was a professor of English. And it turned out that they were very good friends, and John Dyer-Bennet was Richard Dyer-Bennet's younger brother. So I ended up getting his albums for Christmas quite often. And I thought he was terribly well known, and that when I grew up, I expected to read a biography written about him by somebody else. And as I grew up and discovered that there was none, I decided that I would take on the task myself.
Well, there are probably a bunch of reasons why he was very well known in his day, which would be the 40s and 50s.
Yes,
and one of many faded lights, and I think the book is a good source of illumination for Richard Dyer-Bennet. We're going to learn a little bit about him tonight. So he started as what was he? Who was he?
Yeah, I'll give you a little quick biographical sketch of him. He was born in 1913 in Leicester, England. His father was an officer in the English Army and fought in World War I, and like so many of those officers, he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder and ended up moving to Canada after the war. Richard Dyer-Bennet's mother, Miriam, was an American, and after they moved to Canada, things didn't go so well with the marriage, and they ended up moving to Berkeley, California, which is where Miriam's parents lived. Her father was a professor at Berkeley, and that's where young Richard would listen to opera singers, and he loved John McCormack, the Irish tenor, especially, and he eventually ended up enrolling at the University of California at Berkeley and began singing just pretty much as a hobby. And one day, a singing teacher named Gertrude Wheeler Beckman heard him singing at a party and encouraged him to take lessons with her and to pursue his hobby more seriously. And she told him about a guy named Sven Sjölander, and that changed his life. Sjölander was a famous minstrel from Sweden. He was born in 1860. And Dyer-Bennet was so intrigued by the story of Sjölander's life that he dropped out of Berkeley in 1935 and actually traveled to Stockholm to visit Sjölander, who was then very aged. He was interested in the minstrel. That intrigued him. Sorry, go ahead.
How do you define a minstrel? What does that mean? I mean, I've heard it batted about quite a bit, but I don't quite understand what makes Bennett the last minstrel. What's a minstrel?
Yeah, well, that's a very it can get complicated.
Yeah.
Richard Dyer-Bennet was very wanted to be very clear about the difference between a folk singer and a minstrel. He actually wrote an article for Sing Out magazine in the 50s, and I'm going to read you a little bit of what he wrote because it gets at the distinction. He said that the distinction between folk singing and minstrelsy is more than a mere semantic quibble. If you're born and raised among rural people who know the songs, and if you can carry a tune, and you do, you're a folk singer, like it or not. And he would point to somebody like Leadbelly as an example of a true folk singer.
Right, I can see that.
But he made the distinction, if you're born and raised in the city, you may copy the intonation and accent of a true rural folk singer, but you will be at best an imitation of the real thing. What you can become is a minstrel. And that's the distinction that he made throughout his life. He called himself a minstrel because he thought he wasn't a true folk singer by the definition that I just gave you.
Right. So that would make Pete Seeger a minstrel?
By Dyer-Bennett's definition, yes. And I think a lot of people might balk at that, but according to Dyer-Bennett, yes, that would make Seeger a minstrel.
Right, but Seeger's a folk singer.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite tricky, and I don't know that that it's a terribly important thing. That the thing that's important is that they sang some of the same material, and that they took different approaches to it, but it was the material that was important. Dyer-Bennett loved true folk songs, and he just happened to be a trained singer who sang them in a way that was different from somebody like Seeger.
And maybe that's what the distinction that he was sort of back there somewhere, the distinction of being a minstrel, that classical training, that training in music.
I think that does get at it. There were a bunch of people who tried to call him different things. Nat Hentoff was one of the ones who called him the 20th century minstrel. Studs Terkel called him an art singer who sang folk songs as well. Oscar Brand said he sang folk songs as if they were art songs.
Right.
But Dyer-Bennett didn't think that he sang art songs. He looked at the definition of an art song as a song of serious artistic purpose written by a professional composer, as opposed to a traditional or folk song. And Dyer-Bennett's, the songs that he sang were not written by professional composers. They were true folk songs.
Right. And in his day, he sang with Leadbelly?
Yes, he did. At the Village Vanguard. That was when Dyer-Bennett first moved to New York in the early 40s. He got his big break at the Village Vanguard, run by Max Gordon. He became great friends with Max Gordon, and he rubbed shoulders with Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie, and he was actually great friends with Leadbelly. They both dressed up to sing folk songs. Pete Seeger wanted to dress like the common folk, and he wore jeans and plaid shirts, but Leadbelly and Dyer-Bennett both dressed up for their performances, and strangely enough, they did have some similarities. When Leadbelly was diagnosed with the disease he eventually died from, Lou Gehrig's disease, Dyer-Bennett actually went down and performed a concert for him, and you can imagine the audience's surprise expecting Leadbelly and having this classically trained singer with excellent diction and a slight English accent singing the songs instead of Leadbelly. But he actually recorded a Leadbelly song, Green Corn, Come Along Charlie, on his children's album. So they were great friends.
Right. With Leadbelly, over the course of years, I've played a lot of associates of Leadbelly, people that have played music with him, interviewed a few, and the connections are surprisingly broad.
Yes.
And
he touched a little bit of everybody.
Right. So what was one thing that's not clear about Dyer-Bennett to me is his. All right. So the songs most of the songs we sang are in the folk tradition. Was he also a collector?
I wouldn't say he was a collector the way that somebody like the Lomaxes or John Jacob Niles was a collector. He was more. He would look for songs that he enjoyed, and he would sing them. One of the main sources of songs for him was Sven Schalander, the guy I mentioned before.
Right.
He was given Shalander's songbook as such. When he met Schalander, he was quite old, and Schalander kind of willed it to him. But he had friends like Sam Eskin, who was a great folk song collector. And he had discovered a book called Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry, collected by a guy named Thomas Percy in the mid and late 18th century, who was a bishop in England. And he would find he would find songs in that book that he particularly enjoyed, and he would make his own arrangements of those. He would find poems like Lord Byron's "So We'll Go No More Roving" and come up with his own arrangement of that. So I would say he found songs rather than actively sought and collected them.
And using his own what things that he was interested in, not necessarily the pop songs of the day. Yes.
He was. People called him sort of an anachronism. They said, where is his court that he should sing to? Because he very much looked to the past. if we look at one reason why he's not as well known today, I think that's one of the reasons is that he didn't necessarily want to write his own songs or embrace some of the popular songs of the day. He was always looking back. He loved songs like Green Sleeves, Barbara Allen, things like that.
Right. He didn't have Pete Seeger's interested in pop music of the 20s to
Correct.
driving him along.
Yes.
In his day, I forgot what I was going to ask you. Why did people like him so much then? I mean, he had a tremendous following in early in his career. He was very successful.
Yes, he, as I said, he started at the Village Vanguard, and he got a big following there.
So that really lit a fire.
Yes, that became, New York was very much his base. In 1944, he had his first town hall debut, and people don't talk that much about town hall anymore, but it was a huge venue back then.
Right.
And he would, the lines went around the block with people waiting to get tickets to see him perform. And he also performed in Carnegie Hall in 1944. So, this was the big time. He was very, very, very popular. There's a couple of reasons that his popularity faded. In 1947, he decided to move to Aspen, Colorado to open a school of minstrelsy. And his manager, Saul Herock, who was one of the foremost impresarios of the time.
Yes, very well known.
Really advised him not to do this. He said, New York is your base. What are you doing? This is going to be terrible for your career. And it turned out that it was terrible for his career. He was in Aspen from 1947 until 1949, and he lost a lot of momentum in his career that way. He eventually did return to New York, but things were never quite the same, and he also started to be tainted with allegations of being involved with the Communist Party, and he got put on the blacklist in the very early 50s, and that certainly didn't help his career either.
So was he politically active? I mean, he doesn't. If you look at the outsides of what he sings, it's not a politically active music. There are no labor songs. There are no political action songs in his repertoire that I know of.
No, yeah, and that's why it's sad and ironic that he was put on the blacklist. It was mainly guilt by association. He in 1950, a book called Red Channels came out, right, published by 3 FBI agents, and Dyer-Bennett was named in the book along with 151 other artists like Leonard Bernstein, Aaron Copland, Orson Welles, Pete Seeger, Burl Ives, and it was mainly guilt by association. They cited in the book that he'd performed at a concert in 1944 that celebrated 25 years of the Communist Party in the U.S. They said he'd been a sponsor of the Scientific and Cultural Conference for World Peace in 1949, which was, again, suspicious. He'd appeared at a number of parties for men who were suspicious in the eyes of others, like William Gropper or Alexander Trachtenberg. He was given a farewell concert in 1947 by People's Songs, and as you know, People's Songs was a suspicious outfit in the eyes of many. So it was mainly reasons like that he was put on the blacklist, and so it was really guilt by association, as I said. He had done things like he'd worked for Russian war relief in 1944, and as he pointed out, well, in 1944 they were, after all, our allies in World War II. So
right.
It was a bad time for him. He did lose some bookings. He wasn't offered as many recording deals as he had been in the past. So. It was a big check into his career. And
his recordings were on the major labels in those eras?
Yes, he was on Vox, he was on Decca, he was on Stinson, pretty important folk labels, and right. He wasn't entirely satisfied with the way that the his songs were recorded, the way his voice was recorded, the songs that they wanted him to sing. So he ended up founding his own label, and that's another reason he's important. He's one of the first artists to found his own label, and he released his first album on his own label in 1955.
Right, and he did that because he wasn't satisfied with it.
Yeah, he wanted control over what he was singing, how it was going to be recorded, things like that.
Right,
and
it had nothing to do with that had little to do with being blacklisted or getting recordings out.
Yeah, I'm not completely certain about that. I think his being on the blacklist, I think he was not being offered as many deals to record with the major labels as he had in the past. But just as important a reason was the fact that he wanted control over how he was recorded and what songs he wanted to sing. When
was he on? He was Studs Terkel had a very important connection with Studs Terkel, and can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Studs was a huge admirer of his and had him on his radio show on a number of occasions. And actually, when Dyer-Bennett died in 1991, Terkel had a whole tribute show for Dyer-Bennett, and ended up playing some of the recordings of the times that Dyer-Bennett had stopped by Terkel's radio station in Chicago over the years. And Terkel was a huge fan of Dyer-Bennett's.
Was the interview with Dyer-Bennett one of Terkel's first interviews?
I couldn't say. I don't know that much about Terkel. I just know that he admired Dyer-Bennett hugely and had him on his show quite often.
Because I just saw the a Studs Terkel biography, and they mentioned Dyer-Bennett as being one of the first persons that he talked to on WFMT.
Yeah,
early in his radio career, which pretty important, right?
Yeah, and again, it shows how important Dyer-Bennett was at a certain time, and again, yeah, it's just it's sad the way he fell out of the public eye, and that's another reason I wrote the book, is I sort of wanted to try to put him back in the public eye and maybe have some people hear his music who hadn't heard it before. Because if you like somebody like, let's say, Joan Baez, Dyer-Bennett was a huge influence on Joan Baez, whether or not she will admit it. I tried to contact her and her folks 3 times when I was writing the book, and I never got past her mother. So that was unfortunate.
So why wouldn't she want a connection to that? I mean, or maybe anything.
That's a good question, Dave. I'm not sure, because she recorded So We'll Go No More Roving on her 5th album, and it was exactly Dyer-Bennett's arrangement. Her guitar playing style was very similar to his.
Right.
Obviously, she had a very different sort of voice for a folk singer than most of her contemporaries, just as Dyer-Bennett did. I'm not really sure. The only thing, and you know, this is just complete speculation, Dyer-Bennett was, a lot of people never accepted him fully into the American folk song movement.
Right.
For a number of reasons. They thought he wasn't fully genuine because he had been born in England. He never affected an American accent. His voice, as you know, sounded very different from most American folk singers.
Right.
He was by the time the folk boom was coming on, he was getting a little bit older. You know, he wasn't hip, he wasn't cool. He didn't write his own songs. So I think a lot of people, you know, saw him as somebody who looked to the past. And yeah, as you know, the 60s was very much about looking to the future. So I think that those might be a few reasons.
Right. Well, certainly Joan Baez and many other pop singers of the day looked to the past, and maybe Richard Dyer-Bennet was too much of an influence for them to admit. You know, because
yes, that's possibly true.
You know, very interesting. In the British folk music scene, obviously he recorded some early songs and poems of British origin. Do you think that he had any impact on the revival of British folk song?
I don't think that he did. he's from England, and he did have a number of tours in England, but they weren't very successful. They weren't well promoted.
Yeah.
For one thing, I have read some letters that his daughter Bonnie had collected. Bonnie was very helpful in helping me write the book, and he was very upset with the way the tour was promoted. Apparently, it wasn't advertised well. He didn't get very good crowds, and the English tours were a big disappointment to him. After, I think he had two, but after those, I don't think he made a serious effort to make inroads there again. I don't see him being an important influence on the English folk revival.
Right, laying the seeds of singing folk songs in Great Britain, sort of before it really hit in the 60s.
Yeah.
Which was pretty important. Like Ramblin' Jack Elliott in Great Britain was a great influence in folk songs, but it was all convoluted because they're British folk songs going to America and then back to Great Britain. And
yes, very, very strange.
It gives me a headache thinking about it.
Yes.
What are some of the other modern links to Richard Dyer-Bennet are there any others that you see besides Joan Baez and
I think Baez is really the main one. I was pleased to find that my book ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, and I think that the only reason I could think it would be there was because of his link to Baez. But really, there haven't been, besides Baez, nobody else has really picked him up.
Wasn't there a sort of a rock ballad of one of his songs, like a very popular? It's a popular folk song. Wasn't that? Maybe there's probably a lot of connections if you dig deep enough.
Well, I mean, there were some. One of his pupils at the School of Minstrelsy was a guy named Will Holt, and he wrote "Lemon Tree," which became a big hit for Peter, Paul, and Mary. There's some tenuous connections like that, but really, by the time the big folk boom hit, Dyer-Bennet had sort of been relegated to the past, and both in America and in England, and I don't think that the influence carried on all that much beyond Baez, and people, as I said, Baez didn't make a lot of the facts. She never promoted Dyer-Bennet as being one of her influences, so I think he was pretty much relegated to the past.
Well, she was a pop star, not a folk singer, so that's a whole different beast. But I think there are a lot of people like Richard Dyer-Bennet who haven't seen the light of day for a long time. That we need to get a flashlight and excise them a little bit, bring them out, and I don't know if they're ever going to have the popular acclaim, but you never know how tastes change. And I find that he's a remarkable artist. Now, was he a teacher? Did he teach in? Somebody called me a couple of weeks ago from Long Island and said that he was a teacher at a university in Long Island briefly.
He was. He taught in 1970. He started teaching at State University, New York, Stony Brook.
Right.
And he taught minstrelsy. He also taught some drama classes. He'd seen a performance in the late '60s of some students and approached the students saying, "You know what? You could really use some work with your diction and things like that." And so he ended up being offered a assistant professor position at SUNY Stony Brook in 1970, and his classes were very popular. In my book, I have lots of glowing evaluations from his students, and there were some students. There was a woman named Leslie Harker who was a nice singer of folk songs, and a guy named Andrew Schulman, who's a pretty important musician in New York now too. He actually ended up writing afterward in my book about Dyer-Bennett's guitar styles, because Andrew Schulman is a wonderful guitar player. But so he did carry on his legacy that way through his teaching.
Right.
Unfortunately, he had a stroke in 1972. and that cut back on his teaching and
performing.
Yeah, sorry.
He also, I guess, he filled out his career in many other ways. He did some folks. He did some minstrels from more ancient sources, and some video.
Not sure what you're referring to there.
Some ancient ballads that he set to music. I don't.
Yeah, certainly a lot of his songs were from the 15th century or even before. Two of his other major projects were he translated Schubert's Schöne Müllerin song cycle, and he wanted to sing that in English, which was a big thing. Nobody had
Right.
Performed Lieder in English before. And then he also, very late in his career, he became fascinated by Robert Fitzgerald's translation of the Odyssey.
That's what I was
talking.
talking.
He began public performances of the Odyssey. And one of his last projects, he wanted to record the entirety of the Odyssey, but he didn't live long enough to do it, and but the fact that he wanted a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to begin to record it, and did perform sections of it on a number of occasions, including a sort of a triumphant return to the Village Vanguard, and parts of that have been filmed, and there's a documentary about his efforts to record the Odyssey that's a very nice film as well.
And you've obviously got a copy of that. It's hard to get.
Yes, it is hard to get. I hope it will become commercially available. I don't think it will, but it's a very, very nice film.
Right. It's not available on YouTube.
No, I could put it on YouTube, but I would get in copyright trouble. Now there are some performances of him recorded in 1962 for a television show that I have put on YouTube, and they are a good place for people who are interested in Dyer-Bennett to see him actually performing live. Unfortunately, the lighting is very strange in the studio. I don't know why, but Dyer-Bennett was a very handsome fellow. He was a very athletic. He was a very good soccer player, actually, and a great tennis player.
Right.
Very handsome guy, but in the videos on YouTube, the lighting is such that his face doesn't do justice to what a fine-looking fellow he actually was. But you can at least see him playing his guitar, and there's also one song included. He did some versions of some folk music that Beethoven made arrangements for, and he includes one of those performances in the songs that are on there. So those have been a big hit on YouTube. Get lots of hits on those and lots of emails from people saying how glad they are to see him and how much they enjoyed his music in the 40s and 50s.
So late in his career, he really reached way back and pulled out, working on some very his music, his classical music training. That's what he really researched and went back into.
Yeah, he really enjoyed these songs that Beethoven had made arrangements for. In 1946 he made some recordings of them, and then later on in his own label, his seventh album, he included a number of those Beethoven songs as well. Yeah, so his range went well beyond folk music. Right. We talked about the Schubert Lieder, the song cycle, and the Beethoven songs, his interest in Homer's Odyssey, things like that. So really, he had a number of interests, and most well known for his folk songs, but he really went much farther than them in scope.
Right. I think that he went much further than most of the popular folk singers of the time, including Seeger and virtually all of them. He had a much broader range of interest in material, and that might have been part of his demise.
Yeah, I think people love to pigeonhole performers and say, oh, Seeger is a performer of protest songs or songs of social conscience. And Dyer-Bennett, they couldn't pin him down like that. That was one of the problems early in his career. People say, well, what are you exactly? And he was one of those performers who didn't fit any standard profile and fell through the cracks a little bit that way.
Yeah, no pigeonholing
Right.
him. So where else what doors or where has your research into Dyer-Bennett taken you? What surprising places? Any surprises along the way?
Let's see. Not really. It was great fun speaking with some of his students, both at SUNY Stony Brook and from his School of Minstrelsy. I made some nice connections there and found out about a lot of performers who've had fairly modest careers, but who spoke volumes about Dyer-Bennett,
right.
And what a great teacher he was. Really, the most fun I got out of the book was just some of the relationships. This fellow Will Holt is a wonderful character. Andrew Schulman, Lessel Harker. It was fun speaking with Oscar Brand. Oscar Brand was a huge fan of Dyer-Bennett's.
Right.
I got to talk to Pete Seeger on the phone for 45 minutes or so. The main thing was just finding out some of his personal connections, and I must say that the fact that his relationships with Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie were a little surprising to me and pretty charming.
Was there in any of your research? I didn't see anything, but was there any connections with Susan Reed? It was sort of another classical, folk.
Yeah, I didn't find a whole lot about that. There were some people that I thought there would be a bigger connection between because of their styles of performance, but didn't really find anything of real essence to follow up on there.
Yeah, all right. So tell me a little bit about the resource page that you put together on Richard Dyer-Bennet. That's very interesting. And it's a fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it was sort of the dress rehearsal for the book. It's called the Richard Dyer-Bennet resource page, and it's actually hosted by Richard Dyer-Bennett's nephew, David Dyer-Bennet, who's a young man I grew up with in Northfield, Minnesota. And that was where I sort of it's kind of the book in miniature, and it's for people who don't want to take on a whole book but want to find out about Dyer-Bennett. It's a good place to start.
Right.
And
right.
There's a number of interesting features on the site. There was a nice article that came out in Sing Out magazine in 1998 by a fellow called A.V. Shirk that was about Dyer-Bennett. Dyer-Bennett published 2 songbooks in his career that are available on eBay. And of course, his CDs are now available from Smithsonian Folkways and on iTunes. The website's a good place to start, and a lot of people actually know about the website and don't know about the book, even though I try to promote the book on the website. But the website was the beginning, and that's where I got dozens and dozens of emails from people who remembered him earlier in their lives and were happy to see that his flame was being carried on by me.
Yes, and it's quite. I'm very happy that you did it. I don't think there are any other books going to be coming out about him, so I think you're it for the time being.
That's the case. Yes.
If David Letterman wants to do a show about Richard Dyer-Bennett, it's too late.
Yes.
But very, very good. And you've written the book's for sale on. Is there any place that you want to sell it, or if people want to get a copy of it? It's from the
University Press of Mississippi, and but it's most easily purchased via Amazon.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. It's full
thank you very much.
Full of interesting stuff, and it's a kind of old-fashioned book too. It's just beautifully done. I'm very happy to have got a copy of it.
Well, thank you, David.
Paul, you've also written some other musical some other musical subjects.
Yes, I've a couple things. I'm a huge fan of the English folk singer Ralph Mctell. Most people know him only for his song "Streets of London," but he's an incredibly talented singer-songwriter.
Right.
And I wrote the liner notes for his box set that came out a few years ago. I'm also a big fan of bluegrass music. I'm working on a biography of the McLean Family Band, who are a band from Kentucky who toured 62 foreign countries under the auspices of the U.S. State Department and performed at Carnegie Hall as well.
Was that in this that in the 60s? Was that in the 60s, or when did they?
The McLean family band were most active in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
They're still around today, and I'm actually working on a book with a collaborator about them right now. But so it's my tastes are many in music. For example, I love Bob Dylan, even though he's as far away from Richard Dyer-Bennet as you can get.
Well, is there a connection between Bob Dylan and Richard Dyer-Bennet?
Well, I would say so. They performed some common songs. Spanish is a loving tongue was one of Dyer-Bennett's songs that he performed, and Dylan performed that on his ill-fated 1970s works, Self-Portrait and such. He performed a cover of that song. And, Dylan actually loved looking to the past. I mean, if you look at the roots of a lot of his early songs, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Where Have You Been, My Blue-Eyed Son, that's very much Lord Randall influence, which is one of Dyer-Bennett's important songs that he covered as well. So, you know what it's like with folk music. If you dig deep enough, you're going to find connections.
And is there anything else in the hopper?
Mainly the work on the McLeans. That's a big thing.
Thank you so much for all the info and hard work about Richard Dyer-Bennet. Good luck to you, and thank you very much.
Alas, my love